think that if we're going to claim to be the air capital, this ought to be a first-class international museum.
Walter House has been a volunteer curator at the Kansas Aviation Museum since 1991, but his relationship with airplanes goes back a lot further than that.
So I was in the Air Force for 23 years, worked at Boeing for 20 years.
Who better to give us a tour?
This airplane is important because the 43 of these Laird Swallows were the first production airplanes in Wichita. We had a good factory brochure and we had good factory photographs. We were able to use a magnifying glass on the photographs, and we got, it's probably 99.9% totally correct.
This particular plane was built in 1927. In fact, this museum currently owns or has on loan 40 historically significant aircraft. This museum is known for being one of the best in the country when it comes to restoration. Hundreds of talented, dedicated, and highly skilled volunteers spend countless hours of their time carefully and meticulously working on planes that are donated to them, lovingly restoring them to their former glory.
I love the 1931 Stearman Model 4 that we have. It was an airplane that belonged to the Texaco, the Texas company, in the early 30s. And we have that very airplane, and we're restoring it back to its original glory.
Restoring these planes is definitely a labor of love for these volunteers. Most of the planes that arrive here aren't in very good shape.
And most everything that we get as far as an airplane restoration, it's a basket case. And like our 1931 Stearman down there, it came in to us with the fuselage frame, which is steel tubing, was in two pieces, and a lot of it was rusty and bent. And we have put that back into what is now just about a flyable airplane. There it is now. Looks a little bit different. Even though we don't fly them, we put everything in them. All the controls and everything are installed in the airplane.
A display that gets a lot of attention is this one. It shows all the airplane manufacturers that were located here through the years. Who knew there were so many?
But there's been over 25 airplane companies operated here during the years of the 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Because of our history with airplane manufacturing, there are things you can see here you just can't see anywhere else.
You know, because, as Walt was mentioning earlier, there were so many companies in the early days, you know, the late 20s to mid-30s. There were so many companies here in Wichita. A lot of those companies, maybe they only built one plane, or they built 4 or 5 or 6 planes, and then they just went out of business. And so we're very fortunate to have quite a number of those early planes that names that people won't remember at all. Aviation enthusiasts maybe not even aviation enthusiasts won't remember these names, but we're fortunate to have a lot of those planes that we're restoring. In many cases, we have the original drawings, and probably the best example of that is the Swift Sport.
Swift was a company that was created by the same man who started the White Castle hamburger chain. Lon believes the company only made 6 planes before they went out of business.
We were fortunate to have stumbled upon one of the original airframes, the only one known to exist, along with some wing parts and some engine parts. And then we have all 29 original drawings for the Swift Sport. So we're going to build that up to spec, and we'll have the only Swift Sport known to exist in the world, including the Smithsonian.
But in this case, you know, Walt was talking about the Stearman 4D, where they had to go and look at other Stearman 4Ds that are being restored so they could get measurements. In this case, we won't have to do that because we've got everything. There's the instrument panel.
This restored 1934 Stearman Model 73 Navy NS trainer is number 12 of the 61 that were built between 1934 and 1935.
Guys are working on the Watkins Skylark, and that's also a very unusual plane. There weren't many of those built.
This photography studio is where the plant that built them was originally located. As magnificent as these planes are, you get to see a lot more than just the outside of them here. You also get a look inside.
We have a lot of aircraft engines on display. Some are really rare.
As are the documents stored here. The museum has original photographs, schematics, drawings, and blueprints for almost every aircraft registered in the United States from the 1920s through 2004. In fact, the Smithsonian has made copies of some of the data stored here for the National Archives. It's not just the things inside the museum that are worth seeing, though. The building itself is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. This was Wichita's original airport.
They began construction in 1929, and the construction was halted by the stock market crash. And as I understand it, they started back in again in about 1932 or 33, and the building was completed in 34 and dedicated shortly thereafter, and went into service in late 34, early 35, and then existed as an air terminal until 54, when air service was moved over to Mid-Continent. This building, again, as I understand it, the site for this airport was in part determined by Charles Lindbergh. He was working with a group of people establishing air routes across the United States, and this is the highest point in the region, and so it was determined that this would make a good spot for an airport. Out on the front of the building is a huge relief that was made using a process only used in Wichita known as cartholite. It's basically mortar and ground glass, and it's the largest example of that in Wichita. And the scene it depicts is Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis arriving over the coast of Ireland, and that was put there in honor of Lindbergh because he did help, pick the site for this airport.
One thing I love in this building is this atrium. Up in the top of the ceiling of the atrium, the stenciling has been restored, the Art Deco type stenciling.
The floor of the atrium is stunning as well, with this compass rose set in the middle of a terrazzo floor, a floor that's been walked on by a lot of really famous feet.
They built the airport, of course, and because of air travel at that time and planes not being able to fly nearly as far as they do today, this was a major stopover from east to west and north and south. And so, just about every famous person that you can think of, the most famous of the movie stars and performers of that era in the 30s and 40s, passed through this building. And there's a story about Fred Astaire doing a tap routine out in the atrium. It's a true story. He was waiting for a plane, and there were some weather delays or what have you, and he just decided to do a tap routine, put his shoes on, and tapped around the atrium. And there's another story about Howard Hughes having lunch here, didn't like the food, complained to the waitress. By the time she got back, he was gone, and he had stiffed the restaurant on the bill.
Everyone from Gregory Peck to Wiley Post to Kansas and Amelia Earhart spent their fair share of time here as well.
Well, this terminal was one of the busiest airports in the country at that time. From what I understand, a plane taking off and departing about every 90 seconds. So it was a major hub. Every month we have people from probably at least 20 different countries. They are not coming here as tourists to Wichita. They're coming here to do business with the aviation community. And so this museum is a reflection of that community and our greater community, but it's not the world-class reflection that we really need for this community, which is the air capital of the world. And why is it the air capital of the world? Because in the history of aviation, from the very beginning days of aviation through today, historically 70% of all general aviation aircraft have come from this community. Since we do have that history, it's critically important that we have a world-class aviation museum.